Hello Internet, and today's video is going to be another book opinion, those videos in which I tell you my opinions on a book. And today's book opinion is going to be a little bit different because I didn't plan on talking about this book so soon, but I've really been thinking about it, so I really just want to share my thoughts. This is in no way a praiseworthy book I am talking about. This is a book disappointment. I wanted more from it. It didn't deliver. I'm going to tell you my thoughts on the story I actually got, and then I'm going to give you some ideas on like the original story. Then I'm going to give you some ideas on how I think this story could have done better. So there's going to be sort of 3 sections to this. This will probably be long. I'll try to cut short and like keep as condensed as possible on each part, but whatever. This book that I'm talking about is The Wrath and the Dawn by Renee Ahdieh. It is part of a duology. I have finished and completed this first book. I have not gotten that far into the second book, which I'm pretty sure I'm just reading now for like research purposes to see if there is any hope for this story at all. If you happen to like this story, more power to you. I am not making an ad hominem attack on you personally, nor am I making an attack on the author by calling this a garbage book. I have a right to state my opinion, and you can be offended all that you like. If you have yet to understand that people can have differing opinions on a work of art, that is your own prerogative and has nothing to do with me, as clearly you are not as educated enough to understand that I can have personal critiques, and you are the garbage person in this situation, not me. Disclaimer aside, because I hate those things, we're going to talk about my opinion on this book. First, we're going to talk about the subject matter that we actually received. This book is marketed as a retelling of the Arabian Nights. For people who are not familiar with this story, it is basically there is a king. He has been killing his wives. He marries a new girl every night, murders her in the day, and this cycle continues and continues until one woman is married to him, and she ends up surviving by telling him stories. Through her storytelling abilities and the stories that she tells, he ends up falling in love with her, decides not to murder her, and stops committing a very specific bridecide that he has been doing for about a year or so. So this book has the basic premise of that, but I would say it's pretty much in name only and really has like no connection to the Arabian Nights other than the basic concept of there is a girl, she marries a murderous boy, and she survives one night by telling him a story. Like, that is it. There is really no connection to that original at all. Now, I knew when going into this, having read the original piece of work that this inspired the story, that the relationships were probably going to be extremely problematic. I mean, how are you supposed to fall in love with a dude who has been killing off women for a while now? Like, I knew there was going to be some issues, but I had some promise, right? Because I like the Arabian Nights, as weird and as like messed up as that relationship was, I had like a little attachment to it, right? So I was expecting something, but what I got was horrible. So there are like, I guess, 3 major plot points in this book. One is our main character, Shahrazad. She has her best friend murdered by this king through this marriage death thing, and she decides that she's going to get revenge. So she ends up volunteering herself to be his next bride, and she decides, oh, I'm going to somehow survive and I'm going to kill him. She doesn't really have a plan going into this revenge plot, but I'll talk more on that later. Now, her family knows, they're really saddened, but her boyfriend, when he finds out, her now ex, when he finds out, gets enraged that, oh, she's going to this king. She's like, I can't let this stand. This murderous king doesn't deserve her. So he starts rallying together a bunch of rebels who are not quite pleased that this king keeps killing his wives and taking their daughters without any explanation. And then there is a third plot of magic and why the king has been murdering his brides every day. So let's get into characters, because that's all I really care about. Most of this book was really shallow. Like, the plot, the reasonings, and most importantly, the characters that were pushing along this plot. They were so shallowly done and one-dimensional. Now, I will admit that the audiobook is not great. It didn't have any atmosphere to it. The narrator had everybody have the same voice, male and female, no matter who you were. There was no accent to the English to try to give this Arabian Nights atmosphere, which is something that I really prefer when it comes to books that are taking place in a world where it's supposedly based on some sort of culture. I like to hear that culture as well. If you're taking place in a sort of Middle East culture or Indian culture, I would like to hear that sort of voice from the narrator if I'm listening to an audiobook. Same if you're taking place in some part of Europe, if you're taking place in America. If your character has a distinct culture to it and they come from a place in which their languages would be affected by other languages they know, I want to hear it in their voice because that is beautiful and it adds so much more. This narrator didn't do that, but that's aside. The audiobook's just terrible. It did nothing to help this work, but just from reading it itself, it wasn't a good piece of work to begin with, so I can't blame the narrator wholly. It just wasn't something good written in the first place. So the characters are shallow. My biggest pet peeve was the main character was so shallow. The side characters were pretty terrible in and of themselves, being one-dimensional, only running on like some cliche of an emotion, usually jealousy or envy. But I was like, okay, the biggest issue I had was that the main character who we're following most of the time, who we're hearing the perspective of, she is just as bad. I think this book suffers from this idea and concept that it thinks it's a lot smarter than it is, especially when it comes to Charizard. And when I first read this book, I was like, Charizard, that sounds a lot like Charizard, which is a flame Pokemon. Now, after some thought and consideration, she is very much like her namesake, the Pokemon, because she is just a random bit of fire that really just singes at your robes. Like, nothing really gets burnt in her path. Like, she just says things and she blows up often, and this is supposed to be a character trait we're supposed to admire her for, but I really just think she kind of needs some like emotional management, and she needs to like have a therapist or something that really just tells her when is appropriate things to say and like how to gauge a situation. A lot of the things that she says reminds me sort of a person who thinks that their witty comebacks are more clever than they actually think. It like reminds me of like when you're being bullied, right? So you come up with like some sort of witty comeback to yell at your bully. And yes, the bully pauses because they're like, oh, you said something back? Like, I'm amazed like that you said anything at all. But like on further like thought, you realize that what you said was like just stupid. Like it wasn't witty at all, but it was just like some idiotic thing that was like anybody could say and you weren't clever at all, but somehow your bully was just amazed that you said anything at all. So like that seems a little confusing, but let me give you a situation. So our stupid main character, who has no plans on how she's actually going to commit her revenge plan, decides, hey husband, let us go into the market alone. I think she thinks that she can kill him in the market, but this never goes through. She never even comes close, and I'm not quite sure what she was thinking in the first place. But they go to the market, they pass a vendor. This vendor is a male who ends up catcalling her. She's like, no, I don't want any of your catcalling, vegetable vendor, leave me alone. The husband's being murderous and like, I'm gonna murder everyone, which really doesn't do anything to help his reputation if he's always trying to murder people just because they said something he didn't like. Like, you know, kind of contradicts his own, like, we're supposed to feel sorry for him because he has to kill these women sort of idea. Anyway, later on, like 2 pages later, the vegetable vendor comes back and just starts like berating this girl for not wanting his advances. And then she gets angry, like a normal person would. However, her comebacks are like, anyone could come up with that sort of comeback. You're not that clever. But of course, everybody's like, oh, Shahzad, Queen of Shade. And I'm just like, that's not that strong. Because what she ends up doing when this guy basically says she's a bitch for not wanting his advances is insulting his penis. She just says, like, she makes this sort of clever quip where she's just like, oh, I don't want men who only have small cucumbers, which is supposed to reference the fact that he's selling vegetables and that she wouldn't want him anyway because he obviously has a small penis, which, like, I thought was funny because I was, like, giggling. I was like, oh, that's hilarious. But, like, on afterthought, it's like, that's really not that clever because all guys get a little sensitive if you insult their junk or comment on it in any way. They're little, you could just, like, give it a little look and they're already, like, crying in the fetal position. So, like, you know, it's not that clever to insult this man's junk, but everybody in the background is, like, doing, like, that little gif, like, ah! Like, you know, that little rap battle gif, ah! Like, she just says the smartest thing in the world. And I'm just like, that's a weak insult. Like, that is. And, like, again and again, this happens in this book where it's like, this book and these characters think they're way smarter than they really are. So I actually have another example that just gets me. This comes from Shahrazad's maidservant, who is somehow, I'm supposed to believe, they're friends, even though clearly servant queen atmosphere. I don't understand how these two are friends in any way, especially since this girl's always insulting our main character. But this is what this girl says. Shahrazad is having a little issues. She's, like, thinking on stuff, trying to see how she could possibly love a murderous king. And this is what this said. She says, "Can you be more specific? After all, secrets are infinitely more useful when they are shared." Let that sink in. Secrets are more useful when they are shared. What the fuck is the purpose of a secret then? Secrets are not more useful when they are shared. And before you come at me like, oh no, it actually makes sense. No, it doesn't. It sounds smart. It seems like a bright idea, but if you just put a little bit of brain effort into actually, like, picking apart the words, you realize, no, it really doesn't make sense. I get that the concept that is being went for here is this idea that, oh, if you're the other person who knows the secret, they're more valuable to you, as long as you're not involved with the secret, but, like, you get all this blackmail material, like, they're now more valuable because you can blackmail other people with the secrets, right? Because someone shared the secret to you. Now it has value to you because it was shared to you. But at the end of the day, secrets can only be worth anything if they're only held between a few people or one person at all, because the more people who know it, the more it is shared, the less value this secret has, because it's not a secret anymore. Secrets only have value if only a couple people have them. They are not more useful when shared. They are worthless when shared. So, basically, this book just thinks it's smarter than it really is. Now I'm going to get into my biggest pet peeve, which is really this explanation to why this king was murdering these girls. While I didn't mind how the explanation was handled, I was really peeved that it had to be kept a secret for most of the book, because I think it would have been more in line with the original content, the original story that this originated from, the Arabian Nights, if everyone had just kind of known why this king was doing it. Supposedly, he had a wife when he was like a year ago. She ended up committing suicide. His father-in-law blamed him, placed a curse, said that you have to marry like 1,000 women in this time period. If you don't kill your wives the same way my daughter died, this curse will enact and all your people will starve and famine and war and all that sort of stuff, right? So, he goes along with it because he believes that this is happening. Like, he waited a little bit, things started happening, reports started coming in of like crops failing, so he was like, okay, I guess I have to do this. Yeah, he keeps it a secret. So a lot of the reason why there's like this rebellion and all this uproar is because he keeps it a secret. But I'm just like, I would have liked it to have been like an open thing. Like, it would have been better and added more substance if everyone knew why. You would still have rebels, you could still have Charizard coming in for revenge, but it would have held more it would have added more. So I'll explain that in a second, but I wanted to just talk about the Arabian Nights first and kind of how I feel about the Arabian Nights. So yes, while I find the relationship problematic in the original Arabian Nights, obviously this dude's been killing girls, it really had a lot of character to it because it really had this idea of like storytelling and words keeping you alive. The reason why that king was killing women was because his brother, who he truly loved, had fallen in love, had married, and his wife had betrayed him. He ended up dying of grief, and this younger brother, who becomes king, is angry that his brother had died at the hands of a woman, right? His brother had grieved. So he has this idea, he just becomes a woman hater because women have cost him his brother that he truly, truly loves. So he ends up marrying women because instead of committing just mass femicide, he knows that the people won't go along with that. But if he marries a woman, that woman is now his property under like their laws, right? The idea that your wife is the husband's property. And no one can say anything about how he treats his property. So everybody in the whole kingdom knows that he's marrying these girls to get revenge for the woman who messed up his brother so he died. And the people, like, they kind of go along with it. Like, they're sad, but there is a reason to it. Like, they get it and they go along with it. Not the best reason. I'm not excusing it. But, like, it makes more sense. Like, these people are still sad, but they don't necessarily hate the king himself. They just think, like, he's being a woman hater. This woman survives because she is such a clever, witted person. Like, she's very calm and demure, right? She's very graceful and regal. And when this man comes to her at the night of their wedding, she says, "Let me tell you a story." And when she tells these stories, she starts with a story of a fisherman. And then he goes on a little adventure. But in this adventure, he meets a djinn. The djinn ends up telling another story. She ends each morning on a cliffhanger that this man cannot let go because no one likes stories that end on cliffhangers, so he lets her live another day. She continues with the story of the djinn. However, a character in the djinn story has their own story to tell, so that starts a new line of stories. So it's a story within a story within a story within a story. And slowly this man starts to come and to love this woman for her cleverness until she starts telling her way out of these stories, and by the end of the book that they are married. That's what I loved about this original, that the main character was such a clever person to tell these stories, to survive, to entrance this man to the point that he had the story in his heart that he couldn't let go because it ended on a cliffhanger. However, in this book, she does that for like the first maybe 100 pages. She tells a story, but there's one point where she ends the morning and she tells the end of the story. And the guy's like, "Well, I guess you have to die today because that didn't end on a cliffhanger." And she's like, "No, there's still more. And he's like, "No, there's not." And I'm reading it and I'm like, no, like the way that you ended the story, yes, there could possibly be another story there, but you ended it with just enough of a perfect ending. It's no longer a cliffhanger. Like, if I was really set on killing you and was only keeping you alive because you had really terrible cliffhangers that like just gripped my soul, you did not succeed and you're gonna die. But of course, because the story and Deus Ex Survivus, she ends up not dying even though she's a horrible storyteller. But that is nothing on the original work. That is this book that does a poor job. So now back to the curse and what I would have liked to see. Now, this is my idea of how this book could have been so much more better. First, I want the main character to not be Charizard. I don't like that she's fiery, that, oh, she can shoot an arrow, but she can't shoot moving targets. Oh, she's stubborn and she just is so spicy. Like, I don't want that. I like the original. I liked how in the original Arabian Nights, this girl was like really quiets. She seemed regal. She was beautiful. She accepted her fate. She knew what was going on. And she was clever. Like, thousands of women before her had died at the hands of this dude. But she was clever enough to weave tales so perfectly it entranced this murderous dude. And I would have liked to see that character. I would have liked to give her more personality and backstory. I think it would have been interesting for her to be sort of like a smiley girl, like a soft smile, where she would continuously make soft smiles and she had a silver tongue telling perfect stories, that she could say witty, clever things that would really like a passive aggressive type person, you know, where you say niceties but you're not really being nice. I would have loved if like her snarkiness was that sort of like, oh dear me, like that sort of like niceties, and that she was really regal. I didn't need her to be a warrior. I actually would have preferred if she wasn't a warrior and that her only weapon was her arsenal of words and just this charisma and demeanor about her. I think it would have been really good if we kind of got a manipulative, cold person who, yes, is angry that her friend dies, so does volunteer herself and has this plan to entrance this king and enthrall him, to get him perfectly in the spot with her stories until she can kill him. Like, that would have been a fabulous tale. I would have also liked if the curse was in play. I didn't mind that part. But what if, when this curse happens and he waits a month and he finds out all these terrible things are happening to the crops, he makes a public announcement and he's like, people, I was a young and ignorant fool. I married a woman I was not prepared to marry. I was not a dutiful husband as I was, and after the loss of our first child, my wife committed suicide. Unfortunately, my father-in-law blamed me for the death of my wife, and he has cursed our whole kingdom. He has said that if I do not marry continuously and murder these brides the same way my wife dies, that famine and war will spread across the land. If this is not completed within, say, a year, 1,000 girls dead within a 1,000 days, then there will be an end to this kingdom. And then, so to ensure that he's not getting assassinated all the time, just be like, if this isn't completed by me by the end of this time period, if I somehow do not enact on this, or I die before the time of this completion, the curse will be permanently enacted. And now all of a sudden the people are not really thinking about killing him. And yes, they're still going to be angry that he's taking their daughters and killing them. They're going to be a little bit more understanding. So then you'll have a portion of the community who are like, this king is really struggling to do what he can for his kingdom. He's making sacrifices and we must too, right? But then there still can be that rebellion, because of course there's going to be a sect of people who are like, he's nonsense, this curse is nothing, there's no such thing as magic and curses. This boy king just murdered his first wife and is now trying to come up with an excuse to continuously murder people. And so you could still have this idea of like the people accepting and giving up their daughters as sacrifice, but also having this like rebellion brewing of people who don't believe this curse is a thing. This makes the king a more understandable and empathetic character. He's making sacrifices for the sake of his kingdom. He doesn't like it, he doesn't want to do it, but because of a curse, because of past mistakes, he now has to make these advices. And we could have our main character kind of be a part of that section that thinks it's just like a nonsense curse, but when she gets to meet him and know him, she sees like he's filled with remorse and guilt, and she starts to love him, that he is just a boy and that he really doesn't know what's going on and how to fix these things, but he's trying his hardest. She could like maybe discover that he plans to build a monument in honor of all these women who have been killed for the sake of the country, that he wants to succeed in favor of his young nephew. Like maybe he has like a 10-year-old nephew that he wants to come of age and he plans to succeed as soon as possible, that he has all these plans in place to greater his kingdom, that maybe he has like a little like score of magicians trying to do research on like how to break this curse, while in the meantime he prevents it and stalls it with with the deaths of these women. Like, you could have made him this really empathetic character by doing that, and it would have been really, really interesting. And then having her understand, yes, this is a curse. There's also this added in this book where Shahrazad has magic. I think it would have been interesting to have this girl also have magic, and like maybe she like discovers that she has magic. She realizes that this curse is real, that by her surviving there is still this cursed act, but instead of famine being the thing that happens when she survives, it being the downpouring of rain that happens in this book, because this girl starts to realize, oh my gosh, too little rain, crops die, but too much rain, crops die too, and she starts to discover that by her survival, she's dooming her kingdom. This would be an interesting thing, because there would be still that one side that would be angry at her for daring to survive when so many of their daughters have died for the sake of the kingdom. But there would still be that rebellion sect that would be like, see, there is no famine, there is no lack of water happening, that this king let this girl die. He's obviously making it up. Not foreshadowing and seeing that perhaps having tsunamis like just dash your crops probably isn't great. And it would be a really interesting concept to like switch it up, to maybe have her have magic, to her falling in love with her husband and wanting to give him freedom, so her trying to seek out maybe how to break the curse, or her willing to sacrifice herself but having to break the curse eventually, like that sort of stuff, which is kind of where this book goes. But like, that's just the way that I describe it just seems so much more interesting and makes so much more sense. And then this book doesn't have a lot of good female character interactions. Like, there's only 2 main female characters. In the second book, there are another 2 female characters, but these female characters do not pass the Bechdel test because all they talk about is dudes. Now, my version of the Arabian Nights and my version of the Wrath and Dawn, I think it'd be really cool if you had maybe somebody on his advice council who she ended up inheriting like her father's land or something, so she is constantly in the palace like causing a ruckus saying, you can't keep killing our daughters. It would be interesting if the main leaders of the revolution were women because they're tired of other women being killed. Like, there was so many potentials for like women to be a prominent role. Like, you could have revolutionary leaders be women. You could have like people in the court who are constantly protesting the king or trying to grab his ear be women. You could even have people who actually like the king. Like, you could have women who are just like, dude, we don't believe in this curse. This is nonsense. We love you. We think you're doing great. Like, but this curse isn't real. You can have like various characters that are sympathetic with the king that are women, characters who don't like the king at all because he's committing these murders and they're women. Like, there are so many possibilities to have better female character representation in this book, in my version of the story, that just doesn't happen at all in this original telling. And like, that's really just the whole thing that I'm so angry about this book about, is because I love the source material. I was kind of expecting like a retelling that was along those lines, and I would have really liked it. I would have liked to see this calm female character who fought using words. I would have liked to see her use her voice in her stories as a calm manipulation of this character. I think it would be actually really, really interesting if there was an age difference between these 2 main characters. Like, the boy was actually a boy king. Like, in this book, he's 18. That's like legal adult, but they keep calling him the boy king. What if he was just like 17, right? Like, he married young. He's 17. Like, he married at 16, he's now 17, ruling this kingdom after the death of his father, and the main character is maybe like 20, right? 25, like, she has a little more life experience. Like, I know that's gonna make some of you uncomfortable because of legalities, but come on, like, that would have been a more interesting character if she was the older one in the relationship and he was the younger one. It adds more to her trying to manipulate him to commit her act of revenge and her actually succeeding in her storytelling. It'd be really cool if like she actually has magic and she's surviving because intentionally she's using magic to weave in her words, that when she's telling this guy this story, they are kind of enthralling him like a fireworks show or something. And like, you know, it's just, my version is so much better, and I'm kind of considering like doing an E.L. James and like creating a fan fiction that becomes super successful, that I end up making more money than her original. Like, I'm kind of at this point. In my head, I've already written the first 3 chapters to my new, extremely edited version of The Wrath and the Dawn, and I think it could sell pretty well. Like, people would probably like this book so much more. Like, my book would be a #1 bestseller, and I would just be so sad, like, because I created Renee Ahdieh fan fiction. I think I could do it. So, like, that's my future goal. Like, that's how I'm gonna survive in the future. I'm just gonna commit an E.L. James, write The Wrath and the Dawn fan fiction, become super successful, and yeah. Final thoughts on this book. This book is shallow. The characters are shallow. This book suffers from thinking that it's smarter than it is. It's not. It's not smart at all. It's an utter piece of garbage, and it actually makes me think that Twilight was probably the superior book in this. Which, like, I never hated Twilight, right? I didn't. Like, I see the problems, and I definitely don't think it's, like, a masterpiece of literature, but when compared to this book, Twilight gets a 5 stars. That's how bad this book is. So, I don't know if I'm going to do a book of opinion on the second book. I don't even know if I'll ever get through the second book. But I hope that this had some substance to you, that you kind of understand why I thought this book was garbage. If anything, just take my ideas for how this story could have gone, my concept for how this story could have been told, and understand that is not what you're going to get at all. Instead, you're going to get weak, one-dimensional, shallow characters who probably need to take an emotional management course, and nothing at all of worthwhile or worth sense or clever is ever stated at once in this book. Not even once. It's a game of politics being played by a bunch of amateurs. Not enjoyable. So if you have any thoughts or opinions on The Wrath of the Dawn, if you want to comment those below, I'm more than willing to listen to them. Understand that I will not be taking any ad hominem attacks. If you happen to like this book and want to argue with me in the comments about what you thought was a value of this book, feel free to, but the moment you start saying that I'm the garbage person, that's when I know you're the garbage person. So if you like what you're seeing here and you want to see more, click all those bunny buttons down below, and goodbye, Internet.